Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. At the head table, we have the Prime Minister, the Most Honorable Andrew Holness, the Minister of State and the Minister of Finance, the Honorable Favour Williams, as well as the Honorable Ruddy Spencer, the Minister of State in the Ministry of Finance, Minister Horace Chang, the Minister without portfolio in the Office of the Prime Minister, Ambassador Nigel Clark, who is our moderator for this afternoon, Mr. Danny Roberts, the Chairman of the Public Sector Transformation Oversight Committee, PSTOC, Ambassador Douglas Saunders, the Cabinet Secretary, and Mrs. Maria Thompson Walters. Ladies and gentlemen, Ambassador Nigel Clark.
Thank you, Naomi. The Most Honorable Prime Minister, Andrew Holness, members of the Cabinet, I see Minister Samuda, Minister Chuck, Minister Roddy Spencer, Minister Horace Chang, Minister Favour Williams, Cabinet Secretary, Minister Derek Smith, Minister Reid. We have an excellent turnout of ministers. Minister Samuda was the first one I mentioned. Members of the head table, Ambassador Saunders, Head of PSTOC, Danny Roberts, Executive Director of the Implementation Team, Maria Thompson Walters, Permanent Secretaries, members of heads of agencies, leaders of the private sector, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'd first want to wish everybody a Happy New Year and all the best for 2017. The Prime Minister will be using this platform to inform the public of important policy position. The presentation that he makes today will also be made in Parliament and in more detail. However, in an effort to keep the public informed and updated and to seek buy-in for the policy positions, he will provide the context, the rationale, the objectives, the historical antecedents, the expectations, the institutional structure, the accountability mechanisms, and the immediate actions that are to be expected under public sector transformation. Obviously, there are many matters on the national agenda at this time, but the idea of this forum is to provide exclusive focus on a very important area of national policy. The Prime Minister will take questions on this particular subject, and while there may be interest in other subjects, this forum is meant to deal with the topic at hand, and we would ask that the questions are directed to the substance of the remarks and the policy statement made by the Prime Minister. Without any further from me, can you join me, please, in welcoming the Most Honourable Prime Minister, Andrew Holness.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Ministers, Cabinet Secretary, Permanent Secretaries, heads of agencies, members of the public service, members of the private sector, great Jamaican people all, Happy New Year. A new year begins with new possibilities and new opportunities. Indeed, 2017 began with positive news of 2% growth in the third quarter, marking the 7th consecutive quarter of growth of the Jamaican economy. You notice I'm not clapping. It should be more, but we are grateful for what we have, and we are optimistic that we will see more growth. Inflation is at a historic low, and the current account continues to strengthen. Private sector and foreign investment are gathering momentum, and industry is expanding. The government will not allow anything to detract, delay, or deter the progress and prosperity that the Jamaican people have so longed for. It is against this background that today I want to talk about my government's vision of commitment to public sector transformation. All Jamaicans who earn and consume contribute to the collective revenue base of Jamaica. That revenue base is used to hire some of us, including myself, to deliver administrative, professional, regulatory, policy management, licensing, promotion, maintenance, transportation, and many, many other public services through the central government or through a number of state agencies or enterprises. We who deliver these and other functions comprise the public sector. We are paid by the Jamaican taxpayers to deliver services to the Jamaican people. On a day-to-day basis, I work with hard-working men and women in the Jamaican public sector of all ages, persons who work late evenings and weekends to get the job done, men and women of integrity, passion, and commitment to their country, and I salute you. I grew up with a mother who financed my education and upbringing from a job as a civil servant, as a public sector worker in the Ministry of Labor and Social Security for over 30 years. So you will permit me to say that I am intimate with the challenges, the opportunities, the sensitivities, the needs and the concerns of people who work in the public sector. The expansion of output and growth in the economy is a necessity for Jamaica. Growth creates jobs. It's not an automatic thing that growth will bring jobs. But this government is pro-growth and pro-job creation. So we will be ensuring that what we do is not just growth stimulating, but also employment stimulating. Growth creates opportunities. You know, it's amazing when people have a perspective that the economy is going to grow. All of a sudden, projects that didn't seem feasible are now being placed on the table. I mean, I spend most of my time now reviewing projects. All kinds of projects are coming because people are now sensing opportunity. Very important. So a transformation is happening already in the investment climate. But growth also increases government revenues, which allows us to pay public sector workers better. I see O'Neill smiling. Yes, growth increases not just government revenues, but business revenue as well, so that all workers can claim a higher standard of living of remuneration, of work conditions. So we all agree growth is important. Economic growth, however, depends on the ability of small and medium-sized businesses to thrive and be competitive. They must be able to provide the best quality goods and services at the lowest possible cost. Government, and in particular the public sector, is a significant part of the cost structure of business. Yes, all government agencies, all ministries, all departments are part of the cost structure of businesses. Everyone who works in the public sector is a part of the cost structure of the private sector. I don't think that can be said too often. If we're going to make our businesses competitive, then government too must be competitive and efficient. For example, businesses depend on government services for licenses, permits, regulatory approval, tax payments, public safety and security, justice, road maintenance, waste disposal, transportation. If we can become more efficient in the delivery of these services and reduce our cost to businesses, then businesses will grow and expand and create more employment. If a manufacturer in Jamaica is competing with a manufacturer in Singapore, for example, and the Singaporean manufacturer can submit his application online and get next day permitting, whereas the Jamaican has to fill out 10 forms, go to 10 offices, and it takes, let's say, 10 days. Who will get to market first? Who will have the product cheaper? Who has less cost of government? These are the questions that must be asked when we talk about public sector transformation. There is an inextricable connection between the efficiency of the public sector and the efficiency of the private sector. They both need each other to thrive. For too long, the public sector has believed that their jobs exist in and of themselves, and that their jobs have no bearing on the rest of the economy. The transformation requires a shift in the mindset in how the public sector employees see themselves. The process is achieved through systematic programming and management of the change. You see, the problem with the transformation over the years is that it has suffered from political expediency. Government has not been able to move the economy to create jobs within the private sector. And therefore, governments have sought to fulfill the job creation objective and obligation through the public sector. The inability of government to stimulate job creation in the private sector has led government and the society to see the public sector as the only reliable source of jobs. And therefore, you can understand the nature, the very delicate nature of government, society, public sector relations. You can understand the trepidation and the fear that politicians have when they have to address the issue of transforming the public sector. But there is a conundrum which we cannot continue to escape. If you want better terms and conditions and better pay in the public sector, we have to ensure that the private sector is doing much better than they are doing, so that they are paying more taxes, so that we have more revenues, so that we can give better conditions. The days no longer exist where we can print money to pay wages. What that has caused us is 20 years of inflation, the effect of which has been on the poor of the country. Those days don't exist anymore. And these things have to be said publicly. And I have to trust the Jamaican people, the Jamaican public sector worker, that when I say these things, they are accepted in the best possible way. The outcome of how we have treated the public sector, it has been, low standards of work, waste and low productivity. This has also created a muddled view of the relationship between the public sector and the private sector. Transformation requires a realignment of this perspective. The process that we are envisioning is that the private sector will become the engine of economic growth and job creation and will absorb from the public sector as many relevant skills as possible. Because the truth is, much of the country's human resource skills are tied up in the public sector, some of which could be better utilized in the private sector. So as the private sector is growing, we are expecting that it will absorb from the public sector. It is, however, critical to note that public sector transformation is not about blaming the civil servant. I've heard conversations too often that end up saying, the lazy public servant. But if you really stop and think about it, the public service is a rules-based organization. The public service, by nature, the civil service, is form over function. So public sector workers do what the rules say. They do what they are told and what they are directed to do. That's the reality. So the duty of transformation is not the public sector worker. The duty of transformation is leadership. And in this case, it is the political directorate that is responsible for the transformation of the public sector. And for many years, the political directorate has skirted around the issue. Why? Because of the very fear that if they touch the public sector, it means that there will be job losses. But where did that fear come from? It has come from the inability of governments to stimulate the private sector to create jobs such that people don't see the public sector as the only resort for jobs. Which is why we emphasize economic growth and job creation. This is what this government is about. This is what we are about, and this is why I've invited the civil service, the heads of the civil service, the public sector here today. This is what the transformation is about, to signal to you that the government is committed and will provide the leadership to transform Jamaica's public sector. To get that message across. You know, Jamaica has a long history of public sector transformation. Long history. I won't go back to as far as the 80s, but over 30 years. In the mid-1990s, there was a version of public sector reform where executive agencies were created and what was supposed to be performance-based institutions. Of course, much of this is just in name and not in function. So the form was done, but you can't really say that in function they are performance-based. In September 2002, Cabinet made a commitment to modernize the public sector. A detailed document entitled Government at Your Service, Public Sector Modernization, Vision and Strategy 2002 to 2012 was tabled in Parliament and articulated a vision for a public sector with a performance culture that is client-focused and results-oriented, constantly seeking ways to improve the delivery of public services. Many of you would have lived through that. In 2009, the Cabinet agreed to a strategy of restructuring the public sector aimed at radically restructuring established organizations and systems of government with the goal of making government leaner and more efficient, flexible, responsive, and accountable. This resulted 2 years later in 2011 in the Master Rationalization Plan. You lived through that as well, which sought to integrate and accelerate many of the previously identified strategic initiatives towards the creation of a public sector that is performance-based, efficient, cost-effective, and service-oriented. You lived through that, right? So, in 2013, an evaluation of the implementation of the public sector modernization vision and strategy paper recommended a consolidation of the work of the Public Sector Modernization Division, which was responsible for Government at Your Service, and the Public Sector Transformation Unit, which was responsible for the Master Rationalization Plan, to provide program management through a single modernization unit. So you get the picture. We've been going through this with all kinds of iterations of skirting around doing the actual thing. So in 2013, the government of Jamaica, which was the previous government at the time, entered into an extended fund facility arrangement with the IMF. And the then government agreed with the fund that, and I quote from Jamaica's 2013 letter of intent to the managing director of the IMF, public sector rationalization is to be completed over the program period. The program period should have come to an end, or would have come to an end, March 2017, but of course, we are in a new program. But of course, nothing much was done then. The government is committed to improving the efficiency, quality, and cost-effectiveness of the public sector. It has adopted a timetable for finalizing its review of the Public Sector Management Rationalization Plan and for implementing its adapted plan, which aims at the introduction of shared corporate services, the reallocation, merger, abolition, and divestment, privatization of units, and the outsourcing of services. That's what made its way into our previous IMF agreement. In 2014, the government of Jamaica signed a 5-year agreement with the Inter-American Development Bank, the IDB, to fund public sector efficiency programs aimed at strengthening capacity in human resource management, information and communication technology management and control systems and accountability mechanisms. And of course, we did our part in the studying of the problem. We had the Economic Growth Council, who looked at it as well, the Modernisation, and came up with some very excellent analysis and looked at the need for the government to conduct bureaucratic reform to improve the business environment. So, over 30 years, we have been going through this process of public sector transformation. And we have studied it till, we are repeating ourselves. You could almost say that public sector transformation is not a JLP policy, it's not a PNP policy. It is national policy. National policy. So, transformation of the public sector should not be a surprise to anyone. It is something that has been ongoing and has been said before. Unions should not be surprised. The civil service should not be surprised. The public should not be surprised about public sector transformation. But now is the time to get it done. We have enough studies, we have enough history, we have analyzed the problem. Now is the time to get it done. The government has identified broad priorities for transformation. The implementation and coordination of these actions will be done by a public sector transformation implementation team led by Mrs. Maria Thompson-Walters, who is here at the head table. Please acknowledge Maria. And I'm certain you'll get many more claps as you are successful. Yes, in executing and implementing the transformation. And consisting of professionals wholly and totally dedicated to ensuring that the agreed actions are implemented on time. In addition, the public sector implementation team will need the services of specialists in communication, definitely, law, and industrial relations. The public sector implementation team will have the overall responsibility for coordinating the entire universe of transformation activities across ministries, departments, agencies, and to escalate to my office any areas where there are obstacles. And Maria, I don't think you would need to come to my office very often. I don't think you're going to meet upon any obstacles, because I believe that we have made it absolutely clear that it is the intention of the government to see a transformed public sector. The executive director of the public sector implementation team is empowered and will be acting to coordinate the implementation of agreed government policy. And as you can see, she has my full support. Actions that comprise public sector transformation are high priority for this government, and all ministers and all permanent secretaries and all agency heads will be required to work in unison, in partnership with the public sector transformation implementation team to ensure that the agreed actions are implemented on time. Public sector transformation is so central to the agenda of this government that we have put in place a public monitoring body launched in November last year. the Public Sector Transformation Oversight Committee. And this acronym, PSTOC, I'm certain will become as popular as EPOC. And that, of course, is chaired by none other than Mr. Danny Roberts. What size jacket you wear again, Danny? As mentioned above, the current opposition committed itself to public sector transformation and a similar many of actions under its extended fund facility arrangement, and had made that arrangement to be monitored by EPOC. Though much was achieved on the fiscal front under the EFF by consecutive administrations, public sector transformation lagged. And it lagged so badly that EPOC didn't even bother to report on it. In fact, you have never heard a report about public sector transformation, but that was part of the IMF agreement. This time around, we have an exclusive monitoring body that will be focused on measuring the outcomes. And I go by one principle, what gets measured gets done. And of course, PSTOC's role is to monitor compliance and report to the government and report to the public as well. I want to now brief you on some immediate actions, because we've been in government now almost 10 months, and from day one we have started with public sector transformation. We didn't make it, ostensibly public as to exactly what we were doing. We took our time and prepared. So we're at a point now where I believe we need to bring the public up to date as to exactly what we're doing. The implementation team has developed a roadmap for transformation, and the development is ongoing. Here are some of the actions that will be undertaken this year. More actions will be announced in the future as they are finalized and consultations are completed. The immediate actions are as follows, and I'm literally quoting from the IMF Memorandum of Economic and Financial Policies Agreement, which would have been public since last October, so this is nothing new. Shared corporate services. Corporate back office functions for Clarendon Aluminium Products Limited, CAP Services, the Jamaica Bauxite Mining and the Jamaica Bauxite Institute will be merged, and those services will be provided by the JBI. So that's one example of public sector transformation starting. Corporate functions at CAP and JBM will therefore cease to exist. The team is to identify positions that will be affected due to the implementation of shared corporate services in human resources and quantify the implications through the development of a costed transition plan and schedule. The implementation of human resource shared corporate services throughout the government is to begin by August 2017. And I'm hoping we are on track. So we are going to look at making sure that where it is feasible and possible, that human resource corporate services are centralized. Positions that will be affected due to the implementation of shared corporate services in public relations and communications and internal audit are to be identified, and the implementations are to be quantified through the development of a costed transition plan and schedule. The divestment of Caymanas Track Limited is another example of public sector transformation. So it's not just mergers, but we are also looking to be very extensive in our divestments. And we have completed successfully several divestments. For example, the Port of Kingston the Kingston Container Terminal. We have divested that. The result of that isn't that anybody has lost any jobs. In fact, the result of that is that more jobs have been created. And I didn't hear anybody complaining about it. So that's what public sector transformation is about. It's not such an intimidating thing when you start to think about it. Caymanas Track Limited, that is all but divested. I gather that the signing will be done shortly, hopefully before the week is out. I hear the minister say, next week? You say, I want it done now, you know. Next week. Good, all right. The team is to ensure that the ongoing merger of the Cocoa Industry Board, the Coconut Industry Board, and the Coffee Industry Board, that is done into the Jamaica Agricultural Commodities Authority. And I see Minister Samuda nodding in agreement that he's going to make sure that this is done. The Agricultural Credit Board and the Department of Cooperative Societies and Friendly Societies will be merged into the Agricultural Loan Societies and Approved Organization. I don't see any nod from the minister, but I know, I know he's in agreement that will be done. A complete review of the classification of all existing public bodies in a way that is consistent with the public financial management rules, including identifying and submitting to Cabinet a time-bound plan for the reintegration into parent ministries consistent with the principles of the policy on public bodies. So we have always committed to an institutional review of the Jamaican society, including and specifically government. And this is part of that institutional review. If you stop to think of it, there are some services that are being delivered in a very costly way, which really should be delivered by a ministry. But yet, it is being delivered by a separate agency with a separate management, a separate governance, separate budgeting, which increases in a geometric way the cost of the service delivery. So that is being looked at seriously now. The team is there crunching the numbers. They will come back to us shortly with the plan and program as to how that will be implemented. So we have stopped talking about it now. We are well on the way to doing it. Compensation review. And I see some eyes go up there. The permanent secretaries will tell you that they are not paid enough at all. And, you know, I look, from where I sit, I have to review and look at all the salaries and remunerations that come before me. And I can tell you that, you know, the inconsistencies lend itself to great injustices. So we have to undertake a comprehensive compensation review, which is to build a comprehensive database by occupational groupings, and that includes all types of allowances paid, the amounts, as well as the number of employees receiving each type of allowance in a given financial year across ministries, departments, and agencies to ensure adequate control and oversight over this part of the wage bill. Pilots for Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Public Service, the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, and the Jamaica Constabulary Force are ongoing. So we have started that process. The database for all entities in the central government wage bill will be completed by March 2007. So, 17, sorry, forgive me. Oh, good news, the ones that I have just spoken about. Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education, you have completed those. Good, you're moving very good, very good. Good. So by March 2017, we will have a complete census of the public sector. Well, very important, accurate as well, because one of the things we are discovering is that the duplication is not just a function. The duplication is also of personnel. So the complete census will now throw up where there are instances of, how do I term this now? Fraudulent employment. Oh, no, they call it ghost workers. So we'll start to have a better handle on the cost of the public sector. As I said, the employee census is underway, and that should be completed by March 2017. And all of this, of course, will be submitted to Cabinet as they are completed for our review and finalization. Recruitment rules will be established. It makes no sense that we go through all this process of placing the public sector in order only to have it go back to where it is coming from. So there will be recruitment rules established to maintain what we consider to be the good order of the public service. The complete rollout of the human resource management software for 14 government entities will, is it begin or be completed by December 18? So 14 government entities will have a database, a software that manages their human resource. And that is part of the shared services drive. And that will be completed by December 2018. That is underway. The software has been completed. It's completed its development. You have procured it already? Yes. It is in the testing phase already? You have completed testing. You're doing parallel runs. So it's well on its way now. The Pension Act, this has come on the agenda, dropped off the agenda, come back on. Well, it's going to stay on the agenda now. All right, so I see the leader of government business nodding. So it will make it to the order paper. Well, it's on the order paper and will be debated very soon. Early retirement. We will be pursuing options for early retirement, specifically targeting the eligible population. So previously, this option was, used for all kinds of age groupings. But this is specifically for the eligible population. Public sector transformation will be based on focused reforms with measurable outcomes that will unfold in many phases with the necessary consultation with stakeholders. The phased approach mitigates against analysis paralysis. So instead of trying to analyze the thing to death and try to do the whole thing one time, we're going to do a phased approach. Also, a phased approach will generate lessons at each step along the way that can improve the process of the transformation going forward. And it gives us a chance to have ongoing dialogue with the stakeholders. And in fact, I want you to appreciate that this is an important feature of the transformation, the ongoing dialogue. Jamaica finds itself today with a large number of public bodies, approximately 200 in total, with 200 boards, 200 executives, and the executive staff. And many of these public bodies are either overlapping in functions, and a few of them are non-functional. Some of them have reached their sunset. And so that contributes to the inefficiency of the public sector. And I always like to use the example, now by comparison, Singapore, with an economy 6 times as large as Jamaica. Our GDP is 14.5, they're about $1 billion. Has approximately 50 public bodies. $50 public bodies they have with a GDP 6 times ours. So the plan is to phase in mergers, outsourcing, divestment, and where necessary, closure of some public entities. Public sector entities will be merged where there are overlaps in the services provided. Public sector entities will be closed where the entity has reached its sunset. And there are some agencies that were formed 50 years ago to tackle a particular problem, and they just continue to exist on the budget and not necessarily given any political direction or to take on a new problem. But they appear on the budget. Public sector entities will be outsourced or divested where it is determined that the private sector can deliver the service more effectively. And I see the DBJ here, and I have said to them, you must accelerate the process of divestment and outsourcing. So those who have worked in public sector transformation for many years will tell you that many times the civil service is ready for action. And I see many of the permanent secretaries, the heads of agencies, nodding because you have heard it before, you have gone through the reasoning, you agree with it, it's rational, it makes sense, you see the outcome. But here's the problem now. After it is finalized, then the political class gets nervous. And it doesn't happen. And we believe we are doing a favor to the public service, when in fact what we are doing is timing the prospects of the public service. Because 30 years ago, it's the same combative claim situation for wage increase that we are experiencing. No. When will it change? What will we do differently? We have to change it. So I know that even within my cabinet, there may be persons who are nervous about this. And I totally understand. But this is a defining moment for Jamaica. It has taken us 50 years to get good fiscal management in place of our public resources. It is going to take us, a similar period to get good management of the public sector in place. It's a transformation. This is the legacy that this generation will leave to the generation coming. When they go to celebrate Jamaica 100, they will reflect at this time to say, we here took that decision to give Jamaica an efficient and effective public sector. As mergers and closures occur and shared services are implemented, there will inevitably be some job displacements. But also, there will be opportunities for growth and a more efficient government that delivers more with less and that supports the growth of the users of the service. I want to make an important statement. The objective of public sector transformation is not to cut jobs. Every time it is reported, every time it is said, the only thing that comes out, job cuts. In the restructuring, yes, there will be some jobs that will have to be displaced. But that is not the objective. We are not going into this thing to slash the civil service and get rid of the public sector workers. That's not the objective. The objective is to make the public sector more efficient such that it becomes less of a cost to the private sector, so that the private sector can become more efficient, so that it can create more jobs, so that it can actually take on more employment, which will actually come from the public sector, because a lot of skills exist in the public sector which could support growth in the private sector. That's the objective. So where mergers happen and closures happen and job losses there are inevitable, then the government has a duty, having taken on this responsibility to transform, to ensure that there is some equity, that those who are affected can have access to retraining, and that there is an outplacement system in place that supports the transition into private sector employment. So it is not going to be a callous activity. As I said, I am intimate with the concerns of public sector workers. I grew up in a public sector household. And it is not something that I take on without appreciating the impact that it could have on those families who will be affected. But it is something that in the long run, the medium term, will be better for all of us. And the dislocation that could happen, the government has a duty to support. I want to just address that part of it, because the conversation tends to be very much unidimensional on that. You have been a very good audience. I'm doing the Usain Bolt lap now. A transformed public sector is dynamic, innovative, and responsive to the needs of citizens and business. It is constantly measuring itself and improving. It sees the citizen as the customer to be served. The transformed public sector embraces technology to improve productivity at the workplace, using the advances in telecommunications to share services across the public sector, rather than replication of these services, which are costly. Developing a government-wide communication network for seamless transfer of information between government agencies and stakeholders, as well as for the provision of online services to the public at minimal cost. Implementing a centrally hosted website providing a single gateway through which to gain access to all the information, data, systems, and processes for enhancing the ease of doing business with the government of Jamaica. The transformed public sector will be characterized by greater devolution of authority from a centralized bureaucracy, allowing for quicker, nimbler, and more responsive service. However, such managerial authority and autonomy will be twinned with higher levels of accountability for performance. Transparent performance objectives will be a feature of a renewed Jamaican public sector, and rewards will be linked to performance. Cabsec, will you allow me to share a conversation that we have had? So we were talking about the pay structure in the civil service and the disparities. And I know O'Neill is looking at, he knows them. And we were saying, so, what if we were to introduce performance-based pay genuinely? You say, okay, if this group is to get an increase, we need to see this amount of performance increase. How would that work in the public sector? Could it work in the public sector? What would be the things that we would have to put in place to manage that? It has been spoken about over and over and over again, but we have not really sought to actually do it. My own belief is that there are certain levels in the public sector where you should move right away to a performance-based system. And whilst we have not worked it out in details, I'm just sharing with you that it is something that we're actively thinking about. Actively thinking about it. But that's in the thought phase now. Soon we'll figure out how we can bring it to implementation. The transformed public sector will have greater uniformity in pay scales and rationalization of the plethora of pay scales and grades across ministries, departments, and agencies. There are approximately 100 grades and scales across the public sector, which creates confusion, inequity, and opportunities for arbitrage. Transformation will aim to standardize scales across the public sector so that, for example, an engineer or an accountant at a particular level receives the same pay whether he or she works for Ministry X or Ministry Y or in an agency of government. Public sector employees will therefore be able to choose jobs on what they want to do. Because once you have the match of passion with job, you know that performance is going to be higher. This will lead to greater job satisfaction, greater rates of retention, and better service and performance delivery. As we implement measures that deliver efficiency gains, this will create the space that allows for improvements in the working environments and in the working conditions. Transformation will lead to a rationalization of private sector rented space, some of which is inappropriate and acts as a drag on productivity. If you were to look at the entirety of government and where it is located, you would see that some of the buildings are not fit for purpose and were never built for purpose. And we spend hundreds of millions of dollars each year in trying to make them fit for purpose, in reconfiguring, they contribute to the traffic situation. So all of that is a part of public sector rationalization. Well, so, in fact, you would have heard me talk about the development of the National Hero Circle into Government Circle. And that is being worked on now. And in a couple months, I will bring the nation up to date as to where we are on that. But that is a part of public sector transformation. And I could go on about all the other things, but I think the point is well made. I think everybody understands that we are serious, we are mindful, we are sensitive, and we're going to do it. What is different this time around? We have the benefit of over 30 years of attempts. 30 years of studies, 30 years of analysis, and the public has the benefit of it. So they understand, they know. We have a dedicated implementation team, not a study team, not a review. And their job is to get things done. Tell me something, Maria. You are on a performance-based. fact, that's where it should start. Tackling public sector transformation will lead to entrenching macroeconomic stability. And that's, we can't underestimate the value of that. A focused monitoring framework will ensure that what we say we are going to do, we get it done. That the public is kept informed, not just by me, but that there is an independent voice that is reviewing what is happening and explaining it to the public. And if there are issues to be resolved, they can also play this intervention role. And our growth strategy heavily relies on the transformed public sector. So in fact, even though we are treating it separately, transforming the public sector is actually a key part of the economic growth strategy. So we want the public sector to see themselves as the important instrument of growth and equal and critical partners with the private sector in bringing growth and prosperity to Jamaica. I believe this is the progressive way. But the last thing that distinguishes us is that we have the will. We are committed and we are determined to do this. So I know that we will be successful. I know that we will transform our public sector. With God's help, we will make Jamaica the great place it was destined to be. I want to thank all of you for coming, for listening. I particularly want to thank members of the unions who came, members of the private sector who are here with us, because this is truly a partnership for a prosperous and progressive Jamaica. God bless you, and a Happy New Year.
I think we need to thank the Prime Minister for that tour de force on public sector transformation. Forthright, straightforward, presenting a vision for what a transformed public sector in Jamaica looks like, making the link and establishing how imperative it is for economic growth, and underscoring that this can only be achieved by way of partnership. And the monitoring body, PSTOC, is indeed a partnership between the Confederation of Trade Unions, the Employers Federation, and the private sector umbrella organization. At this point, we're going to take questions on, a few questions on the topic of this afternoon's presentation. I'd ask you on identification to say your name and where you are from. I believe we have mics that are available. Naomi has a mic.
Yes, there are two mics, one to the end here and the other, and then of course there is a roving mic. You can raise your hand and certainly we'll get the microphone to you.
And in the interest of time, we probably won't have many questions. Let's have two or so.
Ambassador and audience, because of broadcast times, we must end by 3:30, so that gives us about 10 minutes of questions.
We have one question here.
Mr. Prime Minister, you spoke very bluntly about your approach to public sector transformation, and of course you also spoke about the fact that you will be job displacement. You can't escape that. Any preliminary estimate at this time as to how many jobs will be cut? That's one. And my second question is, You spoke about public bodies, but I'm also trying to find out if the policy changes that have been made, if they will in any way at all significantly impact the way that executive agency currently operate. Those are my questions.
Prime Minister, you want to?
Well, if you want to.
Well, I believe Mr. Campbell, I believe the Prime Minister mentioned that job cuts were not the objective of the exercise. And so it wouldn't surprise you to say that no numbers exist, because that's not the objective. The objective is entity X and entity Y, we're going to merge those entities. We're going to ensure that there are shared services and functions where those functions can be shared. We're going to have an HR shared service. When that is your objective, the order of precedent for information is a lot different from what it would be if job cuts were your objective. The order is, what software can we use to underpin shared services? What kind of communication infrastructure do we need to put in place to ensure that you can have one physical place where HR shared services are being performed and people across ministries can benefit? What is the staff structure of a shared service complement? What should the job descriptions be? How should those jobs be evaluated? How are you going to sequence this? What are going to be the shared service arrangements between?
But just to support your point, Ambassador, you see, at this point, we don't have the numbers as yet. The truth is, however, it's nothing to be alarmed about. The number of mergers will not be that significant. And in any event, wherever there is going to be displacement, as I've said in my presentation, the commitment of government is to be sensitive to that. So we will assist with retraining and with outplacement. So the idea of doing it in a phased, progressive way is that as we, for example, divest some entities to the private sector, the divestment of those entities more often than not creates jobs. And so government has to now manage the movement of jobs from the public sector into the private sector. And we've seen where, for example, the divestment of the Port Authority, I keep saying Port Authority, Kingston Terminals, has resulted in the employment of about 100 new jobs. So there is a process that we are prepared to engage, right? But as I said before, and I want to repeat it, this iteration of public sector transformation is not about cutting jobs. It is about increasing the efficiency of people who work in the system. And we are not blaming the civil servants for inefficiency. What we are saying is that the way in which the civil service is structured does not allow you to utilize your full potential in an efficient way. And so leadership, the government now, has to come in and restructure. In that restructuring, there would necessarily need to be what is called allocative efficiencies. That means we have to now move some jobs from where they are underperforming or not contributing enough to other areas where they can contribute. And I'm saying that it is a far more moderate, far more considered, far more sensitive approach to dealing with this matter.
We have another question.
Good afternoon, Althea Saunders from the Jamaica Observer. Mr. Holness, I don't believe I heard anything said about corruption in the public sector. Would you care to speak to that as to how the team will be approaching that issue?
And it's not deliberate that we didn't specifically speak to corruption in the public sector. But as I've said before, the flip side of corruption is inefficiency. We have followed a model of dealing with corruption which is investigative, naming, shaming, very bureaucratic, which in itself gives rise to creating cover for corruption. Wherever you see too much bureaucracy, long decision-making processes, a long time frame for making decisions, you will find corruption. So the objective that we are pursuing is to integrate technology, to do the business process engineering so that we are more efficient. The efficiency of your institution actually reduces and removes the incentive for corruption. And so everything that we're doing here is about making the public sector more efficient, which invariably means less corrupt, right? And the best way to explain it is that if there is corruption for getting your driver's license, it is primarily because of a convoluted process of which there is no transparency in why you fail or why you pass. So that means that you have to change that process. You could put police, you could go and sting operations, somebody's still going to do it. But not to say that you shouldn't do that. Yes, you should. Because what you would be doing by doing the sting operations is to introduce into the consideration of the corrupt person the possibility of being caught. And you have to do it in such a way that the probability of being caught is high. But at the same time, you have to restructure. The best way to explain this, I remember as a youngster growing up in Spanish Town, I used to pass long lines of people trying to get birth certificates. People used to stand up and buy a space in the line. Even when the system changed and it was a more efficient process, people still couldn't get it out of their heads that they still went there to stand up to. But you just need to change the system. So it's not that we're ignoring corruption, we're taking a different approach to fighting corruption.
Janella Perseus, TVJ News, sir. Can I ask you to respond to suggestions that the public confidence in the transformation program and other initiatives by the government could be negatively undermined based on the carousel issue, sir?
Firstly, let me say that, you're a good journalist. Yes. No, the Jamaican public, I can't say I'm the most experienced person in the room with the Jamaican public. But I have supreme faith in the ability of the Jamaican public to decipher and to read and understand the issues at play. The Jamaican government that I lead acts accordingly to its laws. And we have always strived to be fair and equitable to all Jamaicans. We went through a very detailed process, followed the law, and the result was the grant of a license. Subsequent, there has been new information provided, and a very important partner to Jamaica internationally through diplomatic channels has raised some concerns. Again, the Jamaican government has a duty to pay attention to those concerns and to reflect on those concerns and see whether or not they could potentially align with issues for Jamaica. And that process is ongoing. The matter is now before the courts. So if anything, I can't say much further than that, but if anything, the Jamaican people should see that their government is following the law and that the courts will eventually make their determination. We strive to be fair to everyone.
Okay, I'm getting the signal that this conference is being broadcast live on radio and television, and I've gotten the signals that we are out of time. I would like to thank you on behalf of the Prime Minister for coming and for your, studiously listening to the presentation. And I know that the message that came through this afternoon will go forth, and we'll have your cooperation in public sector transformation. Thank you very much.